Hello everybody, Nigel here with you, Nigel's Modelling Bench. Welcome back, and this is now part 4 of this little kit here. Lovely little thing as it is. This is the K2 ambulance from Airfix. So we're doing a beginner's build, so there's lots of beginner's hints and tips, how to cut off stuff, how to sand stuff and everything. If you haven't already seen parts 1, 2 and 3, then go back and have a look, because basically I'm not going to cover the basics in every single video. I'll cover them at the beginning, and then as we go forward we get faster and faster and faster. So here's the chassis with the axles all nice and square and everything, and we're now ready to start on stage 5. We've done all this, we've fitted the exhaust, we've fitted all the axles and everything. So now we're looking at stage 5. Now this is where it gives me the opportunity to give some beginners some really good tips. We need to be very careful on how we look at this here, because as you can see we have front and rear wheels. So we've got D2 here, which is a front wheel, and we have D1 here, which is a rear wheel. The inner wheels are the same, D21, and then the hubs are different, D30 and D29. So as you can see, this is the rear, this is the front. So make sure you've got the right wheels, because I haven't taken anything off the sprue yet. I could be mistaken, but I think you can actually mess this up big time. So the difference is the front wheels have a smaller centre, as you can see, than the rear wheels, which have a larger centre. This is because this is a driven axle. That's the half shaft that goes in and it has a ring of bolts around it, and that's basically what's going to drive the wheel around. So basically we need to make sure we don't get confused. So the best way to do this is to get your nippers and just take off one set of parts. So we want one D21, one D30 and one D2. Okay, so D2 is our outer front wheel. Just take off one of those, not two. That way you can come back and think, oh, which one was that? Oh, it's obviously 2. Okay, so we'll take off one D1. Okay, so again, you can see you can see it on the drawing on there if you need to, but sometimes you can't see it on the drawing. But you can see that is obviously D1, that is obviously D2, and you have these parts here to prove it. If we come up to the hubs, we have D29 and D30, so we'll take one of those off of each. Okay, now this is where it becomes important, because on here you can see a difference looking at the back of the parts, but it's not obvious which is which from this side. So I'm going to take my 400 grit sanding stick and just remove the sprue nib from there. I'm going to remove the sprue nib from here, like so. I'm not going to remove the sprue nib from here because we're going to be sanding that joint anyway, so you don't need to remove sprue nibs if the joint isn't affected by the sprue nib. So these parts here, D21, are the same all the way across, so we can just take any 2 of these off. Okay, so now we've got enough to make one of each wheel. Okay, and we can see that if we put the rear and the front half of the wheel together, we can see, I don't have them lined up, we can see here that we can actually build them wrong. Right, okay, they only go together one way. That's to make sure the tread matches. So if I take that off of there now, well, that fits really well. That's actually pinned together. If I try and fit this the wrong way around, if I put that in there and that in there, it goes together correctly. But if I try and do it the other way, oh, it does go. Okay, so it goes that way. And it also goes that way. Okay, so it does fit either way. It's just that I didn't have the pins all lined up. So they will go in either way. And then these hubs go in the back. But as you can see, this is a front wheel. There's a front hub that's gone in the back of there. Lovely. I can also fit that one in there, so we could easily get our wheels confused. So I'm not going to build them as they're saying in the instructions, because here what they're saying, it looks like they're telling you to glue this hub to this wheel and then glue the back half of the tyre on. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to assemble these wheels assemble the tyres with the wheels and clamp them together and everything. So all we need to do, just pulling them slightly apart so I've got a little gap. Okay, so what I've got there is I've got a little gap all the way around now. You can see on there is a tiny gap, and I can move that chassis out of the way so we don't damage it. Take my Tamiya extra thin and just run that into the joint. Plenty in there. Try not to touch the outside of the tyre, because as you can see the glue will go into the treads on the tyre, and if it goes onto your fingers it will destroy you'll get finger marks on the outer walls of the tyre. Okay, so we can clamp that together just like that, and I've got a finger mark on that tyre there, but luckily it's on the inside. So you can see here where it's shiny, you can see the glue is actually running down the tread, so that's really be careful of. It will capillary onto your fingers. Okay, the other way you can do this, if you have a thicker glue, like this one here, this Tamiya glue, which is much thicker, what I can do is put that on my finger like that. My little finger, there we go. You can brush this onto the part. Okay, so if you've got Revell contactor or whatever, if you remember I talked to you about different glues in the part 1. So if you've only got that sort of glue, you can do that, just dab it on, and then what we can do is line those holes up, push this together just like that, and we've glued it first before we actually put them together. So that's another way to do it. Okay, and then what we want to do is get some pegs. These pegs are great, they come from Tesco's, and I'm going to put 4 pegs on each one. Just like so. I'm just going to put a drop of extra thin in there. Let's go a bit of a dry joint there. Okay, and I'm going to peg this one together as well. Again with 4 pegs. So we'll peg that one together as well. That way we should be getting a nice seam-free joint. Then all we'll have to do is sand it. We won't have to start filling it and stuff. So there we go. So we'll let those dry, and I'll build up the other 2, and then I'll come back. And so we have a pile of wheels all dry now. These have been here for about 7 or 8 hours, so they'll be all nice and dry. Put my pegs away. These pegs are great. They come from Tesco's. They're about £2 a set, and they are absolutely brilliant. They've got a really good clamping force on them. They've got the rubber feet so they grip, and they grip nice and true as well. They don't do this. Like some pegs, they go like that and they kind of grip on an angle. So if you are in the UK, you can get them in the sort of haberdashery aisle or whatever, and yeah, they're like £2 for about, I think it's about 20 of them. They're absolutely brilliant. It's not often I say Tesco stuff is brilliant, because normally it's absolute total utter crap, but their food is bloody awful. Anyway, so there we go. So we have wheels now. So these are our front wheels, as we can see, as we discussed earlier. They have the small hubs, and then these are the rear wheels with the big fat hubs in the middle. So basically what we can do now is look at getting these all on. Now the instructions tell us to glue these hubs into the backs of the wheels. There is no option in this kit to have rotating wheels. So if you want to go brum 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 around your model bench, you're going to have to skid the tyres everywhere. So you're going to have no option to have turning wheels. So basically that's going to fit in there, and it's quite a nice fit. It's got a little bit of play in it. You can hear Jess down below me. So what I'm going to do is, rather than do it the way they're saying, these are the front ones here. You can see they go in the back. So you can see the difference in the front and the rears. The rears sit slightly proud of the surface, and the fronts are sort of flush, but they've got a totally different image on them. And they will the fronts will only go on one way. The rears will go on either way, but whatever, it's a nice positive location. So what I'm going to do is, rather than fit the wheels, I am just going to fit the brake back plates. So that is basically going to go on there. It's got there's a lug at the top, you can see there. Okay, so that's going to go into that hole, and there's a lug up there on the top, a slot in the top, so it goes in and it looks just like it's a kingpin in the end of the axle there. Okay, so that's all nice, that's all lovely. So we're going to put a drop of glue on here. Okay, I'm going to put a drop on the outside as well, because we want a nice strong joint, don't we? We don't want it to go falling off. So just leave that like that quickly, and then we get the next front one, and we're going to stick that into there like so, and then this track rod is going to go across the two. So I think I'll grab a pair of tweezers, which are over here. So that's going to go in there like that, and then this one's going to fall down into that one like that. There we go, and it's a lovely fit. That end isn't such a lovely fit. Okay, it is. It's a blind hole, that's the problem. And as you can see, it kind of kicks up on the end. So you'll only go in one way. So I'm going to put a drop of glue into there to make sure it stays in that one. I'm going to put a drop of glue into there to make sure it stays in that one. I'm going to put a drop of glue on that axle and a drop of glue in behind there. And now that should all be nice and solid. Okay, and then I'm going to quickly fit the rear ones. Now I've already test fitted them, and the rear ones are quite a snug fit, so I'm going to put a drop of glue on there and then push that on and give it a little twist as it goes, and then it will find those two lugs and it'll just glue on like that. Do the same on this side, and it's nice that it's a nice snug fit, because it probably means it's going to be nice and true and square and everything. So there we go. So basically on that axle you can see we've got two lugs on that axle. We've got two slots in there, so that's got to go on and line up like that. So we can put a drop of glue on there, put a drop of glue on there, and then a little drop in there and a little drop in there, and that will hold them on. And then out come my parallel bars again. You could use anything for this as long as it's square. But what I'm going to do is push those bars up against those wheels, nice and snug like that, as you can see. Okay, and hold them together like that. And that will make sure that our wheels are facing fore and aft, and they're vertical. Now, if you don't do this, you can look along them, make sure they're good. But what you don't want is your wheels to be all sort of higgledy-piggledy and steering all over the place. So this is called camber, and this is called toe. So you don't want your wheels to be sort of facing like this or like this, or like that, or like that, or like that. You know, you want them, everything to be pointing dead forwards and backwards. So I'm going to do that and just leave that to dry for a good few hours. And I can see that that one there, that hub there is kind of tilted to the top being in. So I'm just going to give it a helping hand, and it's also now toeing in. It's because it's such a tight fit on that hub. So I want to make sure all the glue dries with everything exactly as I want. So I'm going to put a drop more cement on that, because I've got a feeling that's starting to set. And I want it to be a little bit floppy so that I can push it where I want it to go. There we go. So we'll leave that like that, It's late at night at the moment, so I'm going to leave that overnight, but you could leave it for 3 or 4 hours and it'll be absolutely fine. But then we'll get everything nice and square. So we've basically now completed step 5. We're going to have to sand these sprue nibs off of these tyres. Just like so. Remember, we didn't take them off the outside, we left them on there. There we are. And then we're going to sand the seams, and if we see any gaps or anything, we can just brush some Mr. Surface around there and get them sorted. And if you notice, I'm sanding these. I'm not going, I'm just going one, like that. And I'm sanding at 45-degree angle. And I'm following the wheel around. So we get a nice round, but we want a nice flat centre. We don't want the tyre to be bulged up in the centre, we want it to be flat. And then we can take, I've got here, this is a 1000 grit sponge, just go round, just smooth everything out, just like so. I need to check what Jess is doing in a minute. She's chewing something. Jess has found a chew somewhere. I don't know where she's found that. It must be at least 2 or 3 years old. She's not supposed to have them. She's on a special diet because of her poorly tummy, but never mind. It might make her ill, but hey, we've all got a bit of enjoyment in our life, haven't we? How many times have we all gone and got too drunk and suffered for it the next day? So there we go. So that's how we're going to sort our tyres out. As I say, we need to make sure we don't have any witnesses of any seams or anything, so that the tyres look like one piece. And then for this dust and everything you get in, you can see you've got this white dust in the treads. I've got I use this old rubbishy old brush. It's an old stiff brush, just get in there and you can brush all the dust out of the treads. As I say, we may have to give these a quick look over with some Mr. Surfacer, because I can see a little bit of a seam there. We shall see. The worst thing you want is, if you're going to do a worn tyre, is having a seam in the middle. If you're going to do brand new tyres, then generally brand new tyres do have a seam in the middle, but the seam would normally be raised, not like a recess like this is. So 3 more to go and then I'll be back. Right, so here we are back again. It's the next day now, and this chassis has dried all lovely and square, and as you can see, those aluminium blocks have done their job. So we've now got axles which are lovely and square, wheels that are straight, and all's going to look great when it's done. So we can put those to one side now. We'll put those away. So they've gone away now. Right, so we've got our chassis, and then we can see that our wheels are going to fit on beautifully. And if I can make them stay on, you will see that we are going to end up with a very nice looking chassis with nice square wheels. There's no way those back wheels are going to stay on if I do this. Let's see if I can do this. Let's see if I can get this to stay together. No, I don't think I can. Yeah, I can. There you go. So you can see it will sit on its wheels, and when it comes to it, we'll put the wheels on and it'll all be nice and flat and square, and all 4 wheels will be touching the ground. So all good news there. So but also, as I said a million times, be very, very careful, because you can physically fit the front wheels on the back, so be very careful for the newbies out there. Right, so now I'm going to jump forward in the instructions, because here we're going to fit the front fenders, mud guards and the fuel tanks. But because we're going to be painting these tyres, we have 5 tyres. We also have a spare. So we're going to get that one glued together as well. And then when we paint the tyres, because what you don't want to be doing is painting the tyres with the tyre blacks and the method I use for painting them and everything. And then all of a sudden, like, 10 minutes later you come, or not 10 minutes later, but the next day you come along and you've got to do it all again just for one wheel. So try and build up sub-assemblies that are all going to be the same colour. For example, if you're doing an aircraft and you're doing the nose gear bay, which is all white with all dry brushing and washes and stuff in it, you may as well do the main gear bay as well, so you're getting your white paint out once and painting everything once. So we're going to get that glued together. So I've got that here, So I'll get those off the sprues, get them glued together, and then I'll be back. Right, we're back. So we've got that wheel glued together, and I've sanded the seam and everything. Now I have noticed that on these wheels, like you see on this one, we have a bit of a seam showing, and it really does ruin your tyres if you're not a dead beginner. If you're sort of looking at making your models, taking an extra step, you know, making them that little bit better, then things like this can really help. So what I'm doing here is just removing any existing nibs, and we can see around here we do have a seam kind of visible. So what I'm going to do is get my one. I've got Mr. Surfacer 1200 here, which is, it's the same as 1000, just a bit thinner. People say it's got different pigments and blah 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 blah, but it's just thinner. So I'm just going to put this onto the center of the tyre, and I need to make sure it doesn't run down into the treads, because what we don't want to do is destroy that beautiful tread pattern that's been moulded in. These are, honestly, I think these are one of the nicest tyres I've ever seen for the tread pattern. I mean, look, they're gorgeous. A lot of the Chinese kits, this is one area where they get it wrong, is the tyres. So, and if you look at the Thunder model Scamels, their tyres are not good. But you can get the resin upgrades from them, which are very reasonably priced as well. So there we go. So I've just basically put some Mr. Surfacer in there, just so we can sand that seam out and we don't end up with a line. Now if you don't have Mr. Surfacer, you can use paint. Use the thick paint, don't use, you know, thinned paint or whatever, and you can just brush it on, brush it into the area, and then sand it off afterwards, and the remaining paint that stays in the seam will fill it up. But again, this is a beginner build, so I am covering you know, the basics right down to cutting parts off the sprues. If you go back and look at earlier parts of these videos, you know, basics about sanding, basics about cutting the parts off the sprues. I need to do a separate video, I think, on gluing parts together. I think that's something that's going to be asked about, using different glues and the different methods for doing it. So I'm going to carry on and do the rest of these. But as what I was saying, this is an it's not an advanced technique in any way, shape or form. Not much I do at all is advanced, but it's that little tip to take you that little bit further, rather than get to the end and think, looks nice, but you know, it's got 3 wheels on the ground, 1 wheel's in the air, and I'm not happy with those seams down the middle of those tyres. It's just, so this is how to deal with it. And you also notice I haven't painted a single bit yet. I mean with coloured paint, I haven't painted anything, so that's another thing to bear in mind. Right, so I'm going to get on to these other 2, and I'll see you in a minute. Back to light grey. All the tyres have got the Mr. Surfacer in now, so we can let them dry, and then we can sand them down when we're ready. We can put the chassis to one side, take a look at our instructions, and we've now got some building to do here down in part 6. We're going to fit the front mud guards, we're going to build up the fuel tanks. We've got 2 of those, they're identical. Okay, they've shown them here. They don't look identical because they've basically flipped them round, but if you flip that around, you've basically got D44 on that end, same here, D43 on that end, same here. Middle is 54. Oh, 54 and 56, so they're not identical, I'm sorry. So that's handed so that it goes towards the rear. That's probably the fuel level thing, that round thing. So they're not identical. I take that back. So there we go. Even someone doing this as long as I do is make mistakes. So we've got 56 and 54. So what we'll do is we'll build the left hand one up first, and then we'll build the right hand one up after. Right, I want 143. I want 144. So we'll take these off. So that's those. And then for the left hand fuel tank, I'm going to have a 56, which is this one here. And then we want a 45. Now, I'm not going to take the 45 off yet. I'll show you why in a minute. So just remove these. If you've got nice cutters like these, as I say, you can afford to go right up to the plastic and remove the nibs. But if you have the less expensive versions, I wouldn't chance it, because they do tend to rip a chunk of plastic out when you cut with them. So I'm going to get my 400 grit stick here, and you can see we've got a tiny sprue nib on the end of there. Just going to clean that off on my jeans. Just gently sand that to remove that nib. We've also got a little bit on the edge. Actually, I'm going to leave that until it's all glued together, and then we can sand across the front, and we'll have two areas to go on rather than just the one, which will make things a lot more stable, a lot easier for sanding. There we go. Right, and then we've got here, we have a nib on here, and we have a mould seam that we want to get rid of on the tank. So first things first, I'm going to cut that sprue nib away and then sand. The best way to do this is probably to put it down on there like that. And I don't know if you can see that, but where it's glossy it's not sanding, and where it's matte it is. I'm just going to keep sanding that until that glossy bit disappears, because we don't want to see a step in there. And there we go. Just re-establish the radius on the top and the bottom, and do the same on the back. Just sand it away until that step disappears. Unfortunately, on this sprue there is some mould misalignment, because we've seen these steps everywhere, haven't we? So in a lot of cases you have to fill them, but I think in this case we'll get away with just sanding them out. We shall see in a minute. That's the whole thing about my videos. If I make a mistake, then you don't have to. So these should fit on here beautifully now. So we've got on here, we have one side has a leg on it, as you can see, has a tab, and the other side doesn't. So the side that doesn't goes to the front, and the side that's the front has the hole in it there where the fuel filler is going to go. So that is just going to fit onto there like so. So it's not a very positive fit, it's sort of very, as you can see there, it's quite wobbly, but I'm sure we'll get it to line up and look good in the end. So as you can see, you've got the sprue nib left on the front here. We also have some plastic sticking out of the side, so we'll just pick that away like so. The same here, and this one doesn't actually have it, so we're going to worry about that. But that sprue nib on the front, rather than sand it now and risk, ended up touching the ends and everything, what I'm going to do is glue this together first, and then I'll have two areas to rest the sander on to just sand straight across. So there we go. And I'm going to get a sponge. This is a 2500 grit sponge, just to clean up and polish that sanded area and put that radius back on. There we are. Right, so we can hold that in place like that, and I'm going to get some extra thin, just put a tiny amount on this bottom edge, just to sort of get it to bite, and then we can play with it and position it, get it all how we want it, so it's all nice and even all the way around, as it is very, very sloppy. Do the same on this side. So get it eyed up so it's roughly good. and then like that. And then what we need to do is grab the chassis and fit this into the chassis, dry fit it, because obviously we have all this play, so those ends could be like that. So if we fit it into the chassis, that way we know the ends are square to each other, and then we can look at this fuel tank and move it all around. And I just had an idea. What I'm going to do is grab a rule, and if we put a straight edge, we'll take it off. If we put a straight edge across the bottom, we should be able to see we've got an even gap. Now I can see that the gap here is bigger than at the other end, so I'm just going to pull that one down a bit. Push that end down. Oh, that's a very good way to do it actually. Put it on a steel rule, and then these ridges, which are parts of the end pieces, will sit on the rule, and then you can manipulate it all like that. So I think now we're nice and level. We do the same across the front. There we go. It would have been nicer if they'd have had more positive locations on here, to be honest, but it is what it is. At least it's not in two halves, so we don't have a great big seam to deal with. Just going to push that down again. And what I'm doing here, in case you don't understand, we've got the middle piece here, we've got the two end pieces are separate. These ribs are part of the end pieces, so what I'm able to do is put that on that straight edge, and if this is too far that way, I can push it down. Okay, so as you can see there, I can get a nice even gap all the way along, and then the same on the front. And as you can see, every time I push it down, that gap here to the bottom of the screen opens up, so I'm going to push that down to close that gap up. There we are. And then once again, I'm just going to test fit it in the chassis. It fits beautifully, and I think once we've done some filling and stuff on there, it's going to look great. In fact, it's not even glued all the way around, is it? So that's probably why it's moving, because I haven't yet glued it all the way around. So I'll put some glue in there, and I'll put some glue in there, let that capillary around, and then we'll check it on here again. It's the front edge that matters. And then where I've got those sprue nibs, I could just come along with a stick and gently sand them away, just like so. And there we are, job done. So there we are, nicely done. And then I'm going to take some extra thin with a very dry brush and just run over those seams. And that sanding dust will act like a filler and fill in any little gaps that are there. So there we are. And once everything's dry, we can give it a quick sand again. I notice we've got some mould seams here on the top which need to go. So there we are. So I'm going to go on now and get the other one built up exactly the same, and then I'll come back when they're dry. Right, so I've got both tanks built up now. So now we've got to add the fuel fillers. I've got dust and stuff on my fingers. So this is where I'm going to show you a little technique for beginners. First, I'm going to break these bits of sprue off because they always get caught in things. So where are we? We are down here. These parts here, 45. They are the fillers. Now I could just cut them off the sprue, great. But we can see we have a mould seam. I don't know if you can see that, but there is a mould seam across the top. And obviously we're going to have a mould seam down the side. So I'm going to take my little worn out skinny stick, and while the parts are still on the sprue, I'm going to sand the mould seam away, both from the top of the filler cap and from the side. So we can come in like that, and now because the sprue is holding the part for us, and then I'm going to use my little skinny sponge. We should be able to get in and do both of these at the same time. I have actually got one here where I've ripped one half of it away. There we go. So it's a lot thinner, so that should get in there. Even then that's still tight. We just get there and just polish that part up and remove the mould seam, and then we only have one side and the sprue nib to take care of once the part is off the sprue. And I'm just going to get my knife and just scrape into that corner to get to define that filler cap. There we go. Right, so now we can take this part off the sprue. Just like so. Notice I put my finger on the part as I cut it so it doesn't go pew. And then it's going to be very, very difficult to hold, especially with me with no nails. I can get in here and just clean up that sprue nib, just like so, and give that seam a little scrape, and then turn it over. Turn it over and do the same again, just like that, and then hold it on its end, scrape away that sprue nib, and then we should be able to get in with a sanding sponge. It's very difficult to hold, but then what I'm going to do is glue it onto the tank because it's going to be easier to deal with it, but it's actually on the fuel tank. So I'm going to put a drop of extra thin into there, and then the part actually has a ball end on it, and the socket in the tank is a ball, so you've got to sort of select your own angle if you like. So there we are, so that's in there now, and then what we can do is just tiny drop of extra thin underneath, and then what we can do is literally paint the part with extra thin, and that will help the seam lines and stuff be hidden. And I'm going to do this next one. Just hold it in my fingers. So I do this one slightly differently, if I can hold it end on. Like I say, be really careful doing this, guys. And this is like I was saying earlier about, I think it was in part 2, about blunt blades. If you had a blunt blade now, you'd go like that and you'd cut your finger. So that's why it's good to have a sharp blade. So that's that dealt with. So what I'm going to do now is put a drop of extra thin, not fuel, into the tank, and then just drop that in like so. That's gone straight in the right position. And then what we can do is just put these together, check the angles look good. Yeah, they match. And then drop of extra thin and literally paint that part with extra thin, and that should help hide any seam lines. So there's our fuel tanks complete. Now what I want to do is look at these front fenders. So we can see in here we've got a lovely smooth interior surface, lovely smooth exterior. But in reality it's not like that. In the kit it's all full of ejector pin marks. So this is a Swan Morton number 10 scalpel blade. You can get all sorts of different manufacturers make blades this shape. and they're really good for getting into stuff like this. So I can get in here and scrape away these raised areas on the ejector pin marks. The ejector pin marks have raised areas all around them, so I can just get in there and scrape away the material that's raised around it. Just like so. Okay, wet the blade off, and then the same on here. Because we're not after perfection, we just want to get rid of these ejector pin marks, because yes, they're underneath the fenders, and yes, you're not going to see them, but it'd be nice to just have everything nice and smooth and not all full of ejector pin marks. Because you never know, if you enter this model into a competition, there might be 6 of these, and the person that's doing the judging may have just built one, and they'll think, I know, let's see if this one's got if any of them have the ejector pin marks left underneath. And there might be only 2 that have done this, so there you're in a competition against one other instead of another 5. So always good to remove them if you can. As you can see, it's not at all difficult. That one there is a little bit awkward because it's sort of into a corner. But we've got plenty of thickness to play with, so you don't need to worry about that. We are. Just like that. As you can see, we've now got smooth fender interiors, or mudguard interiors. Now with my 400 stick, I'm just going to come on the back and remove that sprue nib from there. And then on the side, we need to be really careful. We've got a very prominent sprue nib right there on the outer edge. Now we've got this flange going around. Let me get all this dust off my fingers. So we've got this flange going around. So what I'm going to do is, using my knife, is just carefully remove most of the sprue nib, and then very gently, just one stroke at a time, sand it away like so. Now we may end up having to put some filler in that because it looks like it has a hollow in it. And then I'm going to get where's my little white one? Here it is. Just go around the inside of the wheel arch just to soften that edge a touch. And then the worn 400, just to polish it. But we'll be careful of not to sand away that. We've got that ridge around there that you can see that's supposed to be there. Okay, and then we also have ejector pin marks under here, but they're going to be hidden by the bumper, I think. I'm not sure. But basically, what you could do is just sand them all out, because I think this section here is a little thick on the chunky side anyway. Or we could fill them up with some super glue, which I think we will do. So there's a bit of a moulding flash around that bottom corner there, so we'll just remove that. And there we go. And there's our front mudguard unit ready to fit. I'm going to put some super glue in those ejector pin marks and just sand them out, just so they look a bit better. They're done. As you can see, they're all filled in, and you'll notice they're filled in with black because I've used this one. This is from MIG Ammo. It's black cyanoacrylate slow dry. It's very, very good for filling because it's quite thick. I'll show you it here. You can see it's quite thick in consistency. The one issue I do have with it, I get a lot of this. You can see this spattering around. I think it's static, but you get that on the plastic part as well. But it is slow drying, which is a benefit or a hassle, whichever way you look at it. But basically what I've done is put some in each of those ejector pin marks, sprayed some kicker on there, accelerator, and then just sanded them down, and you can see they're filled in. It wouldn't be good enough for an outer surface, you know, if it was on the outside of the cab or something, but under there it's absolutely fine. It's just a little thing that most people would say, what are you doing that for? What's the point? You can't see it. Well, what's the point in making a model, really? You know, it's for me, especially if you're new to the hobby or fairly new, you know, doing stuff like this is getting your practice in, so that when you do have to do something that is visible, like if you're doing a HK Lancaster, I think it's got 69 ejector pin marks in the Bombay or something. You know, you need to get rid of them, and you need the confidence to get in there and do it on a highly visible area. So, you know, it's good to practice. So I just noticed I need to do a little bit more sanding in there, because that is quite rough in there. But there we go. So we're ready to fit those fenders. What I am going to do actually is just get some extra thin and just brush over where I've been sanding here, and that will smooth everything out. There we go. As you can see, that's just smoothed everything out. It takes away the sanding marks, it takes away any sort of hairiness you get on the plastic. The plastic goes fluffy. So this front fender unit, front mudguard, is going to glue on to the front of the chassis. So I needn't have worried about those ejector pin marks there, because they're hidden. I thought they would be visible. So I'm guessing that is it. So it's going to glue onto the chassis like that. So it is a lovely fit. So we have these two lugs in here that fit between the chassis rails, and then we butt that up against there, and then we've got these two sort of inner wing bits here. We've got these two bits here that contact the tops of the chassis rails. So that is basically how that is going to go. So we will come in with some extra thin. We're coming from the inside, because the inside won't be visible once the bonnet is on. So we can get that in there, and that will hold that in place. Then we can turn it over, and we can just put some extra thin in there and in there. There we go, and that will hold that nice and solid. And now you can see, when you look at this with the front wheel in there, you can see how she's going to look. And by golly, it looks lovely, doesn't it? So there we are. Now the one thing I am going to do, because I'm not sure about this, I'm going to put a drop of Mr. Surfacer on these sprue nib points there, because I want to make sure they're good before I start painting, because once you start painting, you don't really want to have to go back and start repairing. And the next thing we need to do is fit those fuel tanks. So remember, we've got this, probably the fuel level senders going at the back. I also noticed on one of these fuel tanks we have a short shot, which is great to show you if you're a beginner. As you can see, if you look at this end of the fuel tank, you have a nice flange all the way around. This one, you can see there's a bit missing. It's almost like it's melted or been cut out. And that is what's known in the hobby as a short shot. And what happens is the plastic is injected. So as you can see on here with this sprue, the plastic is injected in there, and it has to rush out, and go out to all those parts. And by the time it gets to here, or here, the plastic is a lot cooler than it was there, so it becomes harder to inject. The other thing is you've got the volume, so the manufacturer will know the volume of plastic they need to make one sprue, so they inject that much plastic as quick as they can, and close the tool with as much force as required so you don't get any flash. So you don't want flash, which is where the plastic leaks between the two mould halves, and you don't want short shots, which is where the plastic doesn't reach all the crevices of the mould. So it's very, very small. It's on the back corner. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not going to cause us an issue. We don't need to do anything about it, because when it's fitted, you can see that is there, and that short shot is right back in that corner there. So we're not going to see it, so I'm not going to worry about it. With something like that, you run more risk of making more mess than actually doing a repair. So I'm just going to glue that tank in there, just like so. That's gone on there, lovely. And they do fit very, very nice, these tanks. So that one's gone in there. So there we are, there's our two tanks fitted and our front mud guards fitted. So we're really starting to take shape now. So we have now completed step 6. So when we turn the page, we're into the body. We're really pushing on, aren't we? So what I'm going to do now off camera, because you see me do it a load, I'm going to go around, I'm going to just put some Mr. Surfacer in here, and I'm going to check the seams around these fuel filler necks once they've gone hard, and then I'll be able to sand them and scrape them once they're absolutely solid. So we'll do that. And the other thing we're going to do, we're going to sand these tyres to see if we've got rid of those seams. So I'm going to take my worn out 400, again it's going to get clogged up if I don't. So worn out 400, you can see I'm going at like 45 degrees across the wheel again, and just sanding to make sure we can't see any gaps or any lines or whatever in the middle. There we go. And then once again we can get our scabby old brush out our treads. You can see I've got some Mr. Surfacer down in that tread there, so I'm just going to move that around. So now we should have a completely beautiful, seamless tyre. Here's our spare. I don't know how much of this we're going to see. But it sits in behind the driver, doesn't it? In a separate little compartment, I think. There we go. Just like so. Clear out the debris. Job done. You can see, as I was saying earlier, they are lovely, lovely tyres. The tread pattern on them is beautiful. So it's a shame they don't have any lettering on them. The Gecko kit does. But I don't think the Gecko kit is suitable for beginners, so that's why I'm doing this one in this video. So I need to sand the rest of those, put some Mr. Surfacer on there, do some sanding around them, and that'll be that. So I'm going to call that a day for part 4, isn't it, this one? So what have we done in here? We've done the wheels and tyres, we've looked at being careful with the assembly, we fitted the hubs, got them all nice and square, we've done a load of ejector pin mark work in there, got rid of the ejector pin marks in the fenders and underneath here. We've dealt with our tyres, dealt with the seams. So part 5, I think we might start getting some paint on this, or we might just crack on with the body and leave all the painting till the end, do it all at the same time. So I think let's probably do that actually. So I'll see you all for part 5. Thanks for watching. By the way, in the comments below, perhaps, well, actually, I'm working so far ahead, it's not really worth it. I was going to say whether you think I should have the rear body open or closed. I think I'm going to go for it closed because it makes a lot less work, basically. So I'll see you all for part 5. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.